everyone, welcome back. My name is Morgan. This is my channel Pisces Paperbacks, and today I'm going to be telling you about all of the books I read in June. I posted a couple of vlogs, so I'll try to be quicker about books that I've already discussed in depth, but I had a pretty good month in terms of quantity and quality, I think. If I counted correctly, I finished 14 books this past month, so let's just get right on into it and I'll tell you about them. Additionally, because it was Pride Month, although it didn't fucking feel like it, thanks Supreme Court, all of the books, with a couple notable exceptions that I will explain when I get to them, all of the books that I read are by queer authors or with queer characters, so loved that, honestly. It was great. The very first book I finished in June was called When the World Didn't End by Guinevere Turner. This is a memoir. I actually requested the audiobook from the library like before it even came out, so I got it like right away, and I looked up the author, and on her Wikipedia page it says that she is a lesbian and has done projects with her girlfriends in the past, but this memoir does not mention her sexuality like at all. It doesn't really discuss that. Guinevere grew up in a cult, and this book follows her very early life and her years in the cult, and then her teenage years when her mother leaves when she's about, I think, 11, and she is forced to leave with her mother. So that is kind of what the memoir follows. I thought this was very good. I gave it 4 stars. Part of me wished it was a little bit more about how the group was run. I think it was called the Lyman family, but she was a child when she was a member of this group, so it was very idealized, and it was very interesting because from her perspective it was the only home she had ever known. So when she leaves, you feel this childlike yearning that maybe it was a better place for her than what she leaves to go with her mother, which ends up being a very bad situation. But like, of course, we know with like reflection and being able to look back and understanding how groups like this work, like it wouldn't have been a good place for her because of like the gender dynamics and all of that stuff. The difficult part of this book, a lot of it's difficult, but I will say explicit trigger warning for sexual assault. She is abused by her stepfather for several years throughout her teenage years, and on a couple occasions she does like explain what is happening, and it is extremely traumatic to read. I had to like stop listening to the audiobook at work because I couldn't listen to it while also doing other things. It was like, this is awful. But it was well written. She's a film writer, so it was very well written, and I do recommend it if that's something you're interested in. Up next, I read Honey Girl by Morgan Rogers. This was marketed as a romance. It's a little bit more on the literary side, about a woman who just finished getting her PhD in astronomy and is now kind of struggling to find a job, like a position in academia for herself, but also struggling to decide if that's what she wants to do with her life and just trying to find her path. And it begins with her waking up after a very drunk night in Vegas where she marries a stranger, and it follows their relationship. But really, this is literary fiction with a romantic subplot. I wouldn't even say that it's like a major subplot. Her wife's name is Yuki, and Yuki does not speak like a real person and is barely a character, and just I just didn't feel like this should have been marketed as a romance, because that's primarily the spaces where I see this book discussed. If you are looking for like an adult coming of age novel where someone who is like 29 is kind of grappling with the ideas of what she wants to do with her life and difficult, complicated relationships with her parents, then I maybe would recommend it to you. I did not enjoy reading this. I gave it like a 2.5. Next, I read Calling Dr. Laura by Nicole J. Georges. This is a graphic memoir. Lots of memoirs this month. I don't know. And this follows the author as she finds out that the man she thought was her biological father is not dead. So she's just kind of confronting that, and then also following her young adulthood in a bad relationship and coming out to her mom. She's a lesbian, so that is kind of like lesbian culture in probably the 2000s, like 2000 to 2010 is kind of a part of this. I thought this was fine. It was sadder than I expected it, but also had some funny parts. I probably would give it 3 stars and would recommend it if you're interested in graphic nonfiction, but it just, I didn't love it. Next, I read A History of Fear by Luc Dumas. This is a literary horror about a man who committed murders in the name of the devil in Scotland. And now, a couple years after his conviction and imprisonment, he has died in custody and left a memoir of sorts, explaining in his words how he came to believe that the devil was pursuing him and driving to commit these horrible acts. And so the book is his memoirs, like that is kind of like the framing of it. And the publisher is a journalist who had covered the stories of his murders in the news. And so between chapters of his memoir, you also get kind of interviews that she did with characters that he mentions and supplementary texts and stuff like that. I thought this was really interesting. If you have interest in horror that has to do with religion and possession almost, then I think this could be interesting for you. This is decidedly in the side of horror that I would recommend to people. I thought it was a little too long. I thought that there's a reveal at the end that you kind of see coming, and you're supposed to kind of see it coming, but because the character himself won't admit it and it's his memoir, you really have to wait till like the end. So that was like frustrating, but I thought it was interesting and I thought that it was narrated well, so I would listen to the audiobook if you're interested. I guess it would be fine in the physical form too, but I did really like the audiobook, so I gave that like 3.5 stars. Up next, I finished Hell Followed With Us. I talked a lot about this, so I'll try to be quick, but I really enjoyed this book. This is a YA horror about a trans boy named Benji who is on the run from the religious cult that he was raised in. So he has tried to escape and is now kind of found refuge with this group of other queer teens in this LGBT youth center that's kind of been surviving post-apocalypse, which was started by the cult. The apocalypse was started by the cult that he was raised in. Additionally, Benji has kind of been infected with this bioweapon that is transforming him and his body. So while this book is very gory, it's also very dark in terms of like body horror, I would say. So if that's something that kind of like makes you kind of squeamish, I don't know that I would go for this one. I really liked this. I thought it was like really squelchy in like a good way, and I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so fun. I gave it 4.5 stars. It really gets into religious trauma and found family vibes. Very good time, but really it goes there in terms of the violence. Next, I read One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. This was my one and only new 5-star read of the month, and I really loved this book. It follows August. She is newly moving to New York. She has found some roommates that she's kind of finding this group of friends that she hasn't really had this type of relationships before. It's really exciting, and she develops a crush on a girl on the subway, and Jane is cool and butch and nice, just very kind and interesting. And through them getting to know each other, August realizes that Jane is from the 70s and she's been stuck out of time on this subway line for 30 years, 40 years. So the book then becomes about them trying to figure out why Jane is stuck there, how she's stuck there, and how to get her off of the train. So I ended up loving this book. I will say it is like 420 pages. I think it's too long. I think there's sections that absolutely drag. In my opinion, I never really fell in love with the friend group. For me, the winning parts of this book, it's very blown out because of the sun. Oh, it's better on this side. For me, the winning parts of this book are August and Jane's relationship. I really loved Jane, although she was pulling some real manic pixie dream girl shit for a while. But I really liked their relationship. I thought their sex scenes were sexy. I'm suspending my disbelief. I don't even care about the time travel stuff, but them banging on the subway, in my mind and in my heart, it was a pristinely clean subway car. Just brand new. No one had even ridden in it yet. That doesn't bother me. I've ignored that. But I loved their chemistry, I loved their relationship, and I loved the aspects of queer history that were brought into this, which always makes me cry. I cried at the end of this, and then I spent the next 2 days after I finished re-listening to the last few chapters and just crying again. So I really loved this, but if you go and you read criticism of it, just know that I agree with a lot of it. It just happened to work for me really well. The next book I read was How to Excavate a Heart by Jake Maia Arlow. This is a YA contemporary romance about Shani. She is a Jewish lesbian on winter break from her very first year at college. She spent her first semester in a very fast, intense relationship with her very first girlfriend, and 3 days before winter break, this girlfriend just like dumps Shani out of the blue, like heartbroken. It's heavily implied that it's because of something going wrong during their first intimate moments. So that is just very sudden. Shani's heartbroken. She's like, I'm never gonna date again. But then she starts walking this dog for over winter break, and the teenage daughter, I guess she's in college as well, college-age daughter of the person whose dog she's walking, they kind of hit it off. So the book is really just a true contemporary romance YA, like them getting to know each other over winter break, Shani deciding, is she ready for another relationship? Like, she just got dumped and she's really going through it emotionally, like struggling, anxiety, stressed out about other stuff. And even though she really, really likes this girl, like, is it too much too fast? And while I ended up liking this book, I gave it 3 stars. I really felt frustrated a lot of the time with Shani just like refusing to communicate any of her feelings or any of her needs to anyone. And you come to understand why, and I don't hold it against her, but it didn't make the entire book like an extremely pleasant reading experience, because sometimes I'm like, I've never seen a character less ready for a relationship ever. So, but it ended up being cute. I liked it. I gave it like 3 stars. If you are someone who typically enjoys YA, and especially YA contemporary romance, I would recommend this one. I thought it was very sweet, and it handled some heavy topics very well, so I enjoyed it. After that, I listened to Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. This is a nonfiction book where the author, who is asexual, tries to explore different aspects of asexuality and asexual community and what asexuality looks like for different people. It very much emphasizes that asexuality looks different for everyone. Everyone experiences it differently. Just like everyone experiences their own sexuality differently, there is a lot about asexuality that is misunderstood by like the general public, and this book is just trying to explore a little bit more about it, what it means to be asexual in our society, when again asexuality can be such a personal experience. So I thought it was very interesting. I will say that I did minor in gender, sexuality, and women's studies in college, and I was like chronically on Tumblr from like 2013 to 2017. So, you know, I did feel like some of the first half of the book felt a little bit like I kind of knew some of this just from like exposure therapy on the internet. But I will say I did really enjoy the chapter where she discusses how society values romantic sexual relationships over platonic friendships, and when you don't experience sexual attraction, what is the difference in value between platonic and romantic relationships. I thought that was very interesting, especially as someone who like has said to my best friend before, like, I wish we could just like move into a house and just raise our kids together and just like hang out forever, because that just seems like more fun. I just thought that was really interesting. I thought a lot of this book was really interesting. I gave it 4 stars. I would say it's a good nonfiction starter, especially for people who maybe are not so familiar with ideas of asexuality in our society. Up next, I read Satisfaction Guaranteed by Karelia Stetz-Waters. This is a sapphic contemporary romance, and it follows 2 women who both inherit 50% of this sex toy shop. One is like the niece of the former owner, and the other is the like good friend. She had been living in like an apartment on her property, had kind of almost an adoptive daughter type of situation. So they have been given 1 month to try and get enough money to pay back like the $100,000 in debt that this store is in. So it's like working together, opposites attract. It's about Selena and Cade. Selena is like wild child, almost a nudist, very, very artistic, creative, go with the flow, stuff like that, and Cade is much more, it seems unfair to call her uptight, but she's just very much more controlled. She's an accountant, she runs her family's art gallery, and she just has a lot on her plate. Cade has also never experienced an orgasm, which is, it's a romance novel, so that's gonna come up. I did not like this. I felt like I talked about it so much in the vlog where I read it, but I didn't actually. It's just that I complained to every single one of my friends the entire time I was listening to it. I just felt like no one in this book respected Cade's time or experience or expertise. She has been successfully running her family's extremely prestigious New York art gallery for years, basically since she was like 20. She's 29 now. And so when they're reading the will and her aunt leaves her a note to her and Selena and is like, I know you guys can do it. It's my store. If you get the money back, you can have everything. But if you don't, it defaults and all goes back to the bank. And Cade's like, it's never going to happen. It's $100,000 in debt. You've been just like throwing money away for months. She hasn't been paying back her suppliers for all the sex toys in the store. Like, there's no way. And her family and her parents are like, ooh, the moon, like constantly stoned, which is fine. I know it's exaggerated because it's just a novel, but they're all like, no, you were born to do this. You're our accountant. And Cade's like, I run our business that you two take credit for, and no one cares that I do all this work and I don't get any of the credit. Not to mention, I'm telling you, you say that I was born to be an accountant and a businesswoman. I'm telling you right now, with my experience and expertise, it's not going to work. We're going to lose the place. It's a waste of time. And everyone's like, no. I was pissed. And then she ends up doing it anyway because, it's a romance novel. But that kind of that kind of vibe continues throughout a lot of the book. This is going to be a little... I'm about to talk about the intricacies of one of the sex scenes in this book right now. So if you want to not listen to this, I guess I'll put like a little thing up on the bottom of the screen to let you know when I'm done talking about this. There is a scene halfway through the book where Cade is like, I should give sex toys a try again. I've tried them in the past and they haven't worked for me. I still haven't been able to achieve an orgasm. Like, that's fine. So she decides to get like the biggest dildo they have there. She goes home, she gets everything set up. She's like, okay, it's time. And without any like prep or anything, she just like shoves this dildo up her vagina. And then is like, I'm in pain, but it must be me that I'm, like, there's something wrong with me. And then she just tries to keep going. And I'm like, I appreciate that this book is normalizing sex toy in later scenes. Not this one. In later scenes, this book normalizes using sex toys in the bedroom and lube, and, like, it doesn't make anything less intimate. I do like that. I do appreciate that. But this scene was like, she's 29 years old, and she is extremely intelligent and educated and in control of every single other aspect of her life, and you're telling me she's never done any research on like lube or foreplay or like getting warmed up before you just go for it? She goes from like 0 to 500 and it's just like, oh yeah, she's just, I'm like, no, you're an adult woman. I found that very frustrating. That was more difficult for me to suspend my disbelief about than anything in this book that has time travel. I gave this 2 stars. Moving on, I then read A Restless Truth by Freya Marske. This is the second book in the Last Binding trilogy. This is a fantasy romantic fantasy, where in the overarching plot there is some sort of conspiracy in the magical government to try and find this old thing that will grant bad people too much power, right? Which is, kind of the fantasy plot of like pretty much everything, which is fine. I thought it was very interestingly done in this universe. I loved the first book, which was called A Marvelous Light. I think the magic in this world is so interesting. I love magical bureaucracy and magical government, so I like really loved that aspect of the first book, and I also loved the romance in the first book. The romance in A Marvelous Light is like, it's one of my favorite things I've read this year, like by far. Unfortunately, I didn't love the romance in the second book quite as much. So the second book follows Maud. She is the sister of one of the main characters in the first book, and she is trying to help with their magical investigation, and she ends up on a boat where the woman that she was traveling with has been killed in, like, the prologue. It's the very first thing that happens. So it's a murder mystery on a boat. And I have to say, the murder plot and the investigation and, like, the limited setting and the limited cast, I loved that. I thought that was so well done. I thought it was so interesting. I like that despite being in kind of like a closed off space, I feel like the magical world expanded. I thought that was very well done. And I just didn't love the romantic relationship between Maud and Violet, who is the love interest in this book. She is a few years older. I think she's like 23 and Maud is 19. So she's a few years older, and she has been living in New York as a stage actress, even though she comes from a pretty socially advantageous family. And so she is being brought back to England because an aunt of hers has passed away and left her everything in her inheritance. So that is kind of how she's on the boat, and Maud just knows that Violet is going to be involved in this investigation, so she approaches her and they become friends, and then eventually they become a little bit more. While I liked so much of this book, specifically their relationship and specifically their intimate scenes just felt very emotionally distant. There were 3 like kind of sexy scenes, which is I think the same amount as was in the first book, but there was 3 kind of sexy scenes in this book, and the first 2 felt very emotionally distant, and it wasn't until the third one where I was like, yes, let's get into it. So I know that Freya, the author, can do it. It's just that the specific relationship dynamics that were being played with and developed in this book just didn't work for me specifically. So I gave this book a 4-star, despite really, really liking the series and the plot. I really think a 4-star is kind of where this book belongs, and I am so excited for the third book. The main character of the third book was in like 1 scene of the first book, and he was an asshole, and then you really get to know him more in the second book, and I'm so excited. I could levitate. I'm so excited. I'm not moving very quickly at all. I really want to talk today, apparently. So the next book I read was called A Novel Arrangement by Arden Powell. I just think I saw it on Twitter, and I thought the premise sounded interesting. It's basically a polyamorous historical fantasy romance, although I would say the fantasy, it's like as if there wasn't fantasy in this, is kind of the vibe. So it takes place in 1920s London, and I forget all of the characters' names, but the main character is a seamstress who also moonlights as a romance novelist, and she has like a secret pen name, keeps it quiet, just is a magical seamstress, and she gets engaged right at the beginning of the book to, I forget her name, but her fiance's name is Arthur. Arthur has a very good friend who he has been living with for years and is just his very best friend, and his name is Jules, and Jules fucking hates the main character. You as the reader are like, it's pretty clear that he's in love with Arthur, but that, you know, she doesn't realize that. So the beginning of the book is basically like her and Jules fucking hate each other, and she's like, stop trying to sabotage my relationship with Arthur. He already is engaged to me. He proposed. I won. He will stop talking to you if you keep being mean to me, and I won't even have to ask him to. So it's very combative, and then they kind of get to a place where they can make a truce, and once they reach that point, they begin to become friends. And she starts getting blackmailed to like reveal her romance novel writing career, which, you know, it's 1920s, very scandalous. And it becomes a polyamorous romance. I would say that this was pretty good. Like, it's easy. It's very easy. It doesn't go into much depth in like really any regard. Like the mystery, it's wrapped up pretty simply. The relationship, like, they don't really linger on any emotional discussions or revelations. It's just kind of like, you're in love with him, and then they go, huh, I am. And then it just kind of like goes from there. The sex scene at the end is closed door. Like, there's some description of like leading up to it, and then it kind of fades to black. So it just, like, it was easy, it was sweet, it was nice, but it wasn't particularly interesting. So I gave it like a 4 because it didn't do anything wrong, but it wasn't like great. Maybe like a 3.75. It feels weird to give it the same score as A Restless Truth because I did like A Restless Truth more, but I feel like in terms of what A Restless Truth was trying to achieve, it was higher, so it had farther to fall. You know what I mean? Up next are the 2 non-gay books that I read this month, and they are The Bride by Julie Garwood and The Wedding, also by Julie Garwood. So Julie Garwood is an extremely famous, well-known romance author who passed away in June, and I wanted to read some of my favorites from her in her honor. She wrote so many books. She's been prolifically writing for the past like 30 years, and I just thought it would be nice to reread some of my favorites. So she was particularly known for, she wrote, of the books that I've read from her, they're in pretty much 2 separate camps. It's like Scottish romances and like romantic suspense where there's a killer. Of the ones where I've read romantic suspense from her, all 3 or 4 of them, like, they're terrible. They're really bad. But I love her Scottish Highlander romances. I have like 5 of them on my shelf right now that I've read, and I adore them. So The Bride is actually one of the very first romances I ever read when I was like 12. I have a very soft spot for this book. It's one of my favorite. I've reread it like countless times. I couldn't even tell you. But I gave this 5 stars. I want to tell you, if I describe this and you decide to read it, you can't judge me. It was written in a different context of like gender dynamics and power dynamics in romances. This book came out in 1989. My copy is actually from 1989. I think I bought it at like my library for 50 cents. But I love this book. If it was written within the last 10 years, you'd be like, what the fuck is actually wrong with you, to the author? Because especially the first like 1 or 2 romantic interactions, you would definitely be like, I don't know. But it's written in a different historical context of what romances were and what the expectations were for the sexual interactions in these books. So, like, you just have to take that with a grain of salt, okay? There we go. That's my disclaimer. Anyway, The Bride is about Jamie and Alec. Jamie is the youngest daughter of an English baron, and the baron didn't pay his taxes to the king. So the king's like, okay, well, one of your daughters has to marry this Scottish laird, who's like a clan leader is what a laird is. As like a show of good faith that you will do something for me since you still owe your taxes. So the baron, Jamie's dad, is like, fine. But the daughters are all terrified. They're like, oh my god, the Scots all kill their wives. Like, it's terrible. And Alec is, of course, the biggest, scariest, meanest guy in Scotland. And he sets his sights on Jamie, and the very first time he sees her, he's like, yeah, that one. Jamie is fiery, she's feisty, she loves to argue, and she's just, I really like her. I don't know. So the book starts off, and very quickly they are married and heading up to his clan lands in Scotland, and the book is kind of basically about them getting to know each other, settling in, and then there also is kind of this subplot where somebody may be trying to kill Jamie. I know I said that her murder plots aren't good, but that's only in the romantic suspense ones that I've read. When it's historical, I don't mind it. So yeah, it's about a marriage, an arranged marriage, getting to know each other, and just like arguing. Is it ridiculous? Yes. It's ridiculous. Like, nothing makes sense. Is it a little misogynistic? Yes. Do I love it? Yes. And then the other one is called The Wedding. I don't know if you can see. There's a lot that have kind of similar names, like The Wedding, The Prize, The Gift, The Bride. There's also Ransom, which is one of my favorites, but I cannot find the audiobook anywhere. Oh my god, that was another thing. I listened to the audiobook of this on YouTube because I couldn't find it anywhere. It's not available from the library. And it was literally like, the recording was like, it still had the parts in it where it was like, turn cassette over to side 2. Change to the next cassette. It sounded as if somebody had played the recording out loud and then recorded that recording from the other side of a room and then digitized that. So it was not a great experience, but I listened to it in like one day. So then I read The Wedding, which is, I'm gonna just not even have them on screen because it messes up the lighting. The Wedding is another one with a marriage of convenience. A lot of them have arranged marriages or marriages of convenience in them because it's just like an easy way to like keep people in the same vicinity in in historical Scottish romances. And basically this one is about Brenna and Connor. And Connor, as a child, his father is kind of betrayed and killed by a rival, an unknown rival. And he's like, Connor, my son, Connor, you have to promise me you're going to dedicate your life to getting revenge. This is who I think did this. This is who I think betrayed us. You need to find the proof, and then you need to exact revenge in the name of your family. And so Connor is now older. He's dedicated his life to this, and he has found no proof against the specific person that he believes is the one who betrayed his father. So finally, Alec, who is in The Bride, he's kind of a side character in this. Alec is like, okay, Connor, you need to call this off. No more feuding. Like, you need to end it. And so Connor's like, fine. But in one last, like, kind of act of defiance, he decides that he's going to scoop up the little English woman who is getting sent to marry the person who, you know, he believes killed his dad. And he's going to marry her instead. And it happens to be Brenna, who they actually met when she was a child. And she was like, she proposed to him 3 times when she was like 11. So he's like, oh, perfect excuse. I could just say that she proposed to me, and that's why I had to marry her if I get in trouble with Alec about it. So the book is really about them and her kind of moving into his home and getting settled in the Highlands and trying to find her place. And I really like this book. I think it's a little bit more ridiculous than The Bride, even though The Bride's a little bit, I don't know. Brenna is like so forgetful. She just will pick things up and like bring them with her. And so the people in Connor's like clan are like, hey, can we just like have a designated spot where we put the stuff that she leaves at our houses, and then you can put the stuff that she brings back to your castle, and we can just like come and get them because this is getting ridiculous. So it's just like a bit much, but I do like this book. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was very cute. So I just love Scottish romances, and I especially love Julie Garwood's. I've read so many of them. I'm so devastated that she's passed away, but she was like 80, so she lived a very full life. And lastly, I finished The Taking of Jake Livingston by Ryan Douglas. I finished this morning. I skimmed the last 50 pages. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not going to rate this because I shouldn't have finished it. I should have DNF'd this weeks ago when I first started the audiobook because I could tell right away that I wasn't going to like it. I didn't really enjoy the writing. I wasn't enjoying the pacing. Like, I wasn't enjoying it, but I stubbornly decided, no, I bought this book, like, right when it first came out. I want to finish it. It's a book that I own. I want to do this. Especially during Pride Month. It's a young queer black boy who's the main character. And, like, I want to do this. I love stories about ghosts. I want to read this. I love stories about possessions. I want to read this. So I was just so determined to finish it that I was, like, forcing myself to do it. I couldn't even, like, I was so unenthusiastic listening to the audiobook. I was, like, I could only listen to it in, like, 5-minute spurts on 3 times speed. And then I'd get bored and I would stop. And it's, like, that's not a good reading experience. And I don't think it's really the book's fault. I mean, yes, I didn't particularly love or enjoy the writing, but it's like, it's also compounded by the fact that I knew I wasn't liking it. You know what I mean? And I don't particularly read a lot of YA, even though I read a couple more this month that I did enjoy more than this. But, like, you know, I'm not the audience. I'm not going to rate it, like, 1 star or anything, because it's not the book's fault that I didn't like it, you know? It's my fault for knowing that I'm not going to like a book, and not even in, like, a fun hate reading way, because the book didn't do anything wrong. It's fun to hate read books when it's like, I can pinpoint 17 different things that the book was bad or embarrassing or cringy about, you know? I can't do that with this, because it didn't really do anything wrong, besides not be a book for me. And then I was like, no, I'm going to continue Like, I made my own bed with this one, so I'm not gonna rate this. It's about a boy named Jake Livingston who can see ghosts in their final moments, like on loop, repeating their deaths. And suddenly bad things are happening, and he believes it's because the ghost of a boy who committed a school shooting and then ended his own life is now trying to enact revenge from beyond the grave. So that's the plot of this, and Jake kind of just ends up getting involved because the ghost is like, well, you can see me. So there were aspects of this that I thought were well done. I just didn't like this, and I'm not going to rate it because that is not fair to this book. If you are interested in reading this, I would say get it from the library. If you don't like it, no harm, no foul. I'm not going to try and deter people from reading this because, again, it's my fault I didn't like this. But, yeah, I'm not going to rate this. It was not an enjoyable reading experience for me, and, again, my own fault. I also didn't finish Harrow the Ninth. I'm like 200. I finally hit the 200-page mark. This is taking so much. I think the only reason I got through this the first time is because I listened to the audiobook. This takes so much brain power to read. Like, I'm trying so hard. I did it. I finally, you know how I said I wanted to be quick? I've been filming for almost 50 minutes, so I gotta wrap this up. So I read a bunch of books this month. Let me know if you read any of them and what you thought. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you disagree with me, tell me why. And let me know if you're planning on reading any of these now that I talked about them. I'd love to hear that too. So I hope you guys had a really good month despite the Supreme Court being bitches. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!